Hello and welcome to the Faith Report, and this is today's episode of Spiritual Spotlight. In today's video, I want to provide a deep dive into the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, this is the central event of Christianity, so it's crucial that we examine the evidence carefully and closely. First of all, Jesus' death by crucifixion is a historically verifiable fact. It's affirmed not just by the Gospels, but also by non-Christian writers like Josephus and Tacitus. Crucifixion was only used by Romans for the worst criminal, so it's highly unlikely that the early church would make up a story of their Messiah being crucified for the sake of it. The crucifixion is the most well-established detail of Jesus' life. Secondly, we need to lay a solid foundation by discussing the fact that Jesus was well and truly dead when he was placed into the tomb. The Gospels provide medical details to confirm this, like when the spear was thrust into Jesus' side, this resulted in water flowing out along with blood, John 19:34. Now that water is likely to have been pericardial fluid that separated from the blood plasma due to blood clotting. Now, this is the important part. That only happens after death has occurred. Now, as someone who loves scripture, I'm amazed by the seemingly minor details that demonstrate the accuracy and truthfulness of the Bible account. The spear to the side is just one piece of evidence that Jesus was well and truly deceased when removed from the cross and buried. So, with that well established, we can now examine the compelling historical evidence that 3 days later, Jesus astonishingly rose from the grave. So, the empty tomb. All four Gospels report that the tomb was empty, but what's even more significant is that they say that a woman discovered it. The reason why I say this is significant is because in first century Jewish society, a woman's testimony was considered unreliable and held very little weight. If the early church were fabricating evidence for the resurrection, they would never have used a woman as their primary witness. The very fact that the Gospels name women like Mary Magdalene as the first witness strongly suggests that the story is historically accurate. In the days that the Bible was written, if you wanted to start a new religion, the cornerstone of it would not have been based on the testimony of a woman. And that's just how things were. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I'm surprised that this little detail hadn't somehow mysteriously disappeared over the course of history. It's worth thinking about. So now let's consider the Roman guards posted at Jesus' tomb. The Gospels tell us that Pilate ordered soldiers to secure the tomb after the chief priests expressed concern that Jesus' disciples may try to steal the body. As professional Roman soldiers, they would have been extremely disciplined and followed orders closely. Guarding a sealed tomb would have been a simple task for them. It's highly unlikely that these guards would have fallen asleep or have left their posts at any time, especially given the ramifications of a new religion potentially starting. Even if the disciples managed to overpower the guards and then steal the body, they would never have been bold enough to proclaim the resurrection in Jerusalem a few weeks later. Think about it logically. The Jewish authorities could have easily silenced them by producing Jesus' body from the tomb. The fact that the Christian movement exploded in growth after the crucifixion right in Jerusalem suggests strongly that the tomb was empty and the Roman guards had no corpse to present. Next, we have the dramatic transformation of Jesus' disciples. Before the crucifixion, they completely abandoned and denied him. Afterwards, they boldly preached the resurrection even at the risk of imprisonment and death. And we know that death wasn't very fun in those days. What could possibly have accounted for the 180-degree change? The most plausible explanation is that they genuinely encountered the risen Jesus, dispelling their doubts and fears that they had before. The disciples were willing to suffer lifelong persecution for proclaiming the resurrection of Christ. People may die for mistaken beliefs, but no one suffers and dies for what they know to be a fabrication. Think about it. And finally, we have the conversion of Paul. Now, if you know Paul, you know that he was an avid persecutor of Christians, and he persecuted Christians right up until he suddenly became a believer after an encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus. Paul suffered immense hardship for his beliefs, being beaten, stoned, and imprisoned. He abandoned his prestige and power among the religious elite to join a fledgling persecuted sect. I mean, such a radical transformation demands a compelling explanation, which Paul provides. He met the risen Jesus Christ. So, in conclusion, the combined historical evidence presents a very strong case that Jesus defeated death and rose from the grave, precisely as he said he would. Oh, and before I forget, do check out my previous video, which I give evidence to how Jesus actually existed in history. Although, after watching this video, I can't imagine why you'd think otherwise. Anyway, it's always good to get a discussion started, so I'm looking forward to hearing your comments below. And let's keep it nice.